Let me continue where Peter ended. The expansion is going to continue. The deterioration will worsen. And it is not because of the logistical strength and fighting capabilities of these groups. The states that we are talking about are facing internal tensions and issues relating to governance that makes their capacities to project a narrative in which their citizens coalesce around increasingly weak. That's number one. Number two, we are continuing to see a retreat and a failure of the democratic experiment across the sub-region in a manner that sends a signal that state capacity to resist is at best minimal. So the story that we are trying to tell is that we need to understand or have a better grasp of who these groups are, what their strategies are, what the narratives and the discourses that they present are. And then on the other hand, how states are beginning to build levels of resilience to be able to create a narrative, but also an operational hands-on response that citizens find useful. And I think in the paper, we make this strong argument that the adoption of particular types of doctrines, particularly the Takfiri doctrine, must be seen as the driving force that is resulting in more draconian interpretations and implementation of Islamic laws implemented by the Hizbah, the usage of particular forms of taxation and penal law, and also the institution of retaliation and discretionary punishment. But we are also seeing, as Bakary said, the interlinkages that allows the movement not only of these groups, but increasingly the criminal enterprises that underpin their activities, cattle ranching, gold exploitation or gold exploration, and the free flow of weapons across the sovereign region. But it's also important to understand the long history of jihadi, terrorism in the Sahel. So that although, as we argue in our paper, the current configurations of both ISWAP and ISGS subscribes to Islamic State ideology and aim to establish Islamic states in northern Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, Niger, and the Sahel, we need to trace their formations to their quest for new allegiances and competition for leadership, both within Boko Haram and then Al-Qaeda in the Islamic State. But we also need to understand the manner in which the factionalism and the splits from these original organizations do represent fundamental shifts in their original memberships and explain some of the consequent actions that we are seeing. The allegiances and alliances that we see have been forged by distinct groups constituting what we argue in the paper is a fundamental split and a shift in their operational tactics, which I will be seeing a little later. But we also raise questions as to the nature of the operational relationship between ISWAP and ISGS. And the argument that we make is that both subscribe to similar ideologies which contribute to and influences how they operate. And that the relationship also manifests in the way that they exploit similar grievances to establish connections with local communities. Now, when I make the argument that the situation is going to deteriorate, it's partly because of the nature of the shifting geopolitics. And I like Bakri's point and Ambassador Edmond's point about the role of China, the role of Russia, the role of Wagner, the departure of the French forces. The capacity of states to respond and to provide a narrative that creates hope is at best very weak. So we are seeing state vulnerabilities to provide even social welfare that allows these groups to provide basic healthcare, water, and to create a narrative in which they project a fairer and just society. So what are the suggestions that we make in response to this rather dismal picture of member states in the Sahel and in ECOWAS that are faced by these challenges? And we make about 5 or 6 points. And if you allow me, I'll go through them very, very quickly. One is that if one looks at state capacities, counter the presence of these groups militarily and ideologically, the picture does not look too good. First, we see that for the Malian state, now MINUSMA must leave, the French have left, the Russians are there. But I think sometimes when we talk about the Russians, and here I want to go back to Bakari's point about what have we done wrong? How do we need to reinterpret the role of external actors? And Ambassador Edmond makes this great point about the role of international assistance and in peace building. So we want to put, Peter and I want to put a little bit more flesh on this in terms of our recommendations. One, we need to identify, support, and strengthen structures and stakeholders who contribute to building community resilience. When states fail to deliver public service, the onus for keeping societies intact and creating opportunities and avenues for livelihoods remains with communities. And we need to create interreligious dialogues as a means of strengthening trust and confidence building, but more importantly, identifying women and youth in building their capacities so that they will be able to mediate and create the inter and intra-communal dialogue that is necessary. Number 2, in all these countries where the capacity of the state is under threat, we need to ask ourselves, what other structures and forms of governance exist that can support, collaborate with, and build synergies with the modern state? And here I'm talking about hybrid political orders in which traditional and cultural institutions that people understand and can relate to are brought in to support, to collaborate, and to precisely because the state has not been able to penetrate its society. There's a need.
Kwesi, your sound is deteriorating.
Alternative ways of interpenetration.
Your sound is deteriorating.
Okay, is it better now?
Switch off your camera. That usually helps with the sound greatly. All
right, yes. Okay. Okay, so hopefully this is much better.
This is much better.
Excellent. So more often than not, when we talk about the nature of the challenges that we are facing, the argument from the international community is that, oh, these are ungoverned spaces. I want to make this point. there is no such thing as an ungoverned space. These are spaces that are alternatively governed. So in seeking to build resilience and to create opportunities for safety, we need to bring alternative forms of governance to the center. Number 3, we talked security sector governance and security sector reform over the past decade. That, for quite a number of cases, have not been very successful. We need a security sector process that speaks to the lived challenges and experiences of the security forces. Number 4, from the map that Peter showed, these groups are able to crisscross the borders and the international boundaries in ways that the state cannot do. Question: how do we build trust across international boundaries amongst people who have been divided by these imaginary lines to be able to share the information that is necessary for quick response? So we are suggesting that probably the international community, together with national governments, must establish border security cooperation councils among Sahel states and the littoral states, so that communities that straddle these boundaries can share the requisite information. Number 5, our established international communities or multilateral organizations are struggling. A new initiative, which is the Accra Initiative, seeks to bring some of the Sahelian states and the littoral states together to say, how do we build trust? How do we share information? How do we bring our people to the center of the response mechanisms so that we are able to respond very quickly, creditably, and in a targeted manner? The approach by the Accra Initiative is not just to use the military form, but to bring developmental processes at the center of the narrative that gives people hope, that gives people the idea that the resistance is a collective thing of both military and developmental approaches. I'll leave my comments here for now.